Hello out there. Thank you for joining me. This is Tammy, Texas Desert Rose, and I have a very special guest with me today. I think you'll find very interesting, especially you expats out there, active duty, spouses, all of that, because she's here with me in Korea.
Hey.
Hello, Rosie.
Hi everyone. It's good to kind of see you. Nice to engage with y'all. And I'm happy to
I
be here,
have a feeling
Tammy.
that a lot of people will see us, a lot of people. So I think we've kind of gone back and forth about the topic that we want to talk about, but I really want to give those who live overseas at all the various countries, I'd love for them to have a place to go, yeah, that's what it's like, and some validation, but also those who are not out of the country, i.e., US, to be able to hear what it's like to live out of the country. So, what do you think, Rosie?
Sure. Well, honestly, I'll give a little bit about myself just so you guys know
Please.
my experience and really where I'm coming from. So, much like I'm sure many of the listeners are, I am part of a military family. I grew up military. I don't
Woo-hoo.
actually, if anyone heard the previous podcast, you might have heard me talk about it before, but just in case, I'll
Talk about
summarize.
what?
Um, I think I might have mentioned my background before, but just to be safe, I'll just share a little
Yeah,
bit about myself
definitely.
again. So I grew up military, spent the first 14 years of my life traveling around the US and around the world, uh, along with my mom and my dad and my sister. Uh, Actually, as a kid, I was living in Korea back in like 1995. And because of that, I had an interest to come back as an adult. So in 2014, I came over on my own. I took part in this exchange program with the university in Seoul, and that completely changed my
Yeah.
life. And to make a very long story short, I came back in 2016 as an English teacher, and 6 years later, I am still here working at the
Six
U.S. military base.
years. I
Yeah.
am so impressed. At this point, I wonder if it wouldn't be more difficult for you to be in the US long term after all
But
that travel.
actually, it is. Whenever I go home, like my friends, my family, they say I act completely different. So there's actually like a reverse culture shock that happens whenever I go home.
Yes. Yes. Would you be willing to say more about that? I can definitely relate. I've been traveling off and on since 2006, 2007,
Mhm,
but really more full time once my kiddo graduated high school. He's 22 now. So the last 4 years, five
mhm.
years or so. And I am amazed at the differences when I go back home now. That idea that you can never go back home is true, at least in my view.
Mhm. I do think that honestly, while things change back home, there's a lot of stuff that stays the same and a lot of stuff that I find really refreshing about being overseas. But then again, that kind of leans to the reverse culture shock of it all, right? So
Sure.
given that I've been here, I've actually spent almost every year of my 20s in Korea. And I think with that and the already very prominent growing pains of the 20s, when you throw in the mix of like a different culture and then you go back to the States where it should be your culture, it's completely mind-boggling. And then the way even your mannerisms and the way you speak, it completely changes. So for me,
Everything.
yeah, everything really changes. So I guess for example, um I've always been a little bit like I've always been like more of a shy person. I am usually reserved, and in the US, people typically lean like a little bit more outgoing and like very friendly. We'll talk to strangers in the grocery store, and I
Depending on
think
what state or city, it could actually be just more direct, more pushy as well.
exactly. But taking into consideration the fact that I'm already a shyer person, and then I come to Asia where they're already reserved. When I go back, my parents are like, "Why are you like I'm even more soft spoken than I was before?" And it's not even like a deliberate thing. It's just a result of the culture I've been immersed in for the last few years.
So this has become really more comfortable, much more comfortable for you
Hmm.
to
And
the
that's a weird
point
thing to explain to
where,
my mom and dad.
oh, right,
Hmm.
right. And I'm sure, and even being military or prior military,
Hmm.
is that the case? I'm sure they get it a lot more than many, but it's still your daughter saying, I'd rather be over here.
Hmm. And it's a weird thing too, because not only, of course, am I American, but then my family is originally from Jamaica. So, like, my
Uh,
cultural identity has almost become a mix of these three very different cultures. Having spent my 20s here in Korea, growing up in the U.S., but then having Jamaican roots, like, it makes for really interesting conversations at dinner, but also really weird mannerisms and
In
cultural things.
conversations at dinner.
Yeah, like I even have an Instagram video like my sister took of me. Like I was sitting at a dinner table and I was just like there, and my outfit was very like Koreanized, I guess. And she's like, "Guys, look at my sister. She's so cute. She looks so Korean." And I'm like, I'm just dressing like how I usually dress.
Right. I
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
Something that Rosie is probably too humble to say, maybe, maybe not, is I found out that she's quite fluent in Korean and even engaged someone who's Korean,
yes,
which
which adds
is
a
just,
whole other dynamic.
I'm sure. I mean, like you are a wonderful, should I say, very intricate and complicated in a beautiful way. I mean, I find myself wanting to pick your brain every time I'm around you.
Oh, I
Hear you
appreciate that.
speak Korean.
Thank you. I mean, I can introduce myself, but I wouldn't, and maybe this is my personality coming in. I wouldn't consider myself fluent. I can get my, I can go to the doctor on my own. I can order food. If someone's lost, I can help them get around. But don't ask me to do my taxes. I've been asked one time and I literally cried in the tax office. So that's probably like
Are you saying do them in Korean, or are you saying just don't make me deal with numbers?
I
No, you're
mean,
good with numbers.
I'm actually good at numbers. It's just don't make me do my taxes in Korean. I can barely do them in English. It's one of those things. But
Oh my
um
goodness, no way.
but no, I think what you said about me is true. And it's weird to, I guess, identify, but take pride in that. But I do like that. Like my life is complicated and weird, but I think that's what life should be. I think life is the most
Yes,
interesting when it's not normal
it's
and
really
living outside of the
only
norm.
weird if you look at the traditional cookie cutter life. I,
Yeah,
for one, don't want that
me neither. And that's
either.
something I've always said. In my family in particular, um, I guess I don't know if it's because of Jamaican roots or American standards or whatever, but there's always been this expectation of like, white picket fence, house, you have to be a Jamaican, say doctor, lawyer, or nurse in terms of your career, but that's not
Right.
something I've ever wanted. And I think me living here and doing what I do, it kind of plays against that. And I really love that. And that's how I like to live my life.
Breaking the rules.
In my own sort of way. I'm still very, very respectful of my parents, though.
Of course, of course. I mean, I think you can break the rules and still be respectful and honoring, and say that's not the life I want, whether it be with your parents or society or whatever.
Mhm.
So speaking of society, do I dare ask you, and certainly it's up to you what you answer and what you don't,
Sure.
what is the difference for you being a minority in the US versus, I guess we're all minorities here,
Mhm.
and what that's like for you?
No, that's honestly an awesome question. And shameless plug, I have a YouTube channel and actually talk about stuff like that there.
Not
What it's
shameless
like
at
being
all.
I'll
Put
add
it
my
out there.
handle later. But yeah, that's actually something that is a really interesting facet of life because, of course, in the US, we do have complicated things that we deal with as minorities. And not to go overly serious really quickly, but there's a history of like institutionalized racism and like these differences in
Very
like,
serious, yes.
yeah. Whereas in Asia, like especially in Korea, there are people that don't understand me and people that will judge me based on how I look, but it's less of this historical institutionalized thing and more of like a what are you kind of thing, which I actually find more bearable than the historical
So
deep
explain that to
rootedness.
those who've never lived overseas, what you mean by that. Can you clarify that? Because it makes
Sure,
sense to me.
sure. When I say like it's I don't want to call it like a curious racism, but it's more of like how just for comparison in the US, of course, the history of African Americans isn't one that's necessarily the happiest. Of course, there's like rooted in slavery and like servant to that's not a word, but working as servants and things like that. And so in modern day society, it's sort of like because of the roots, like people will choose differently because of like that sort of history. But in Korea, it's more like it's actually the most ethnically homogenous country in the world, and something like only 3% of the total population in Korea is foreign. So here it's not so much like a oh you're below us in that sort of way, but it's more like what are you, like who are you,
Like
what are
what
you,
folder did I put you in?
yeah, and like what do I do with you? So which for me it creates an opportunity of education rather than like that like
Yes.
of being treated badly for no reason.
In other words, if you were asked the same question in US, you would be bracing yourself. It'd be more emotion packed and possibly some
Mhm.
shaming, blaming possibly coming. We do
Absolutely.
brace ourselves whether we realize it or not. And here it's more of, I'm trying to figure out where you're from.
Yeah.
And that whenever I lived in other countries, when they would know I was from America, or really they know an American by the way we hold ourselves, by the way we walk. I mean, no
Yeah.
matter what color our skin, whatever, they can tell if you've spent any time in America. I find it very interesting, but they will actually like literally just assume that we go in many folders,
Yeah.
like the Americans, the Heinz 57s, because that's, we're a cacophony of different cultures and
Of course.
backgrounds.
And I think one thing that actually is the most interesting piece to being like African American, being Black overseas in Korea, is that, although Americans, we do fall into these different categories, and we can be described in, generally like certain ways, like, like very confident, we hold ourselves in high regard, all that. There's still these stereotypes that very much exist here. And I feel like part of my reason for being in Korea is not just to do what I do at the military base, but also to sort of be like an ambassador, or like a figure that represents something other than a stereotype. So, not to ramble too much, but even when I was an exchange student, one of my roommates who, like, to be fair, wasn't Korean, she was from Indonesia though, she met me
Okay.
and she was like, "You don't sound Black." I'm like, "Wait, what?" But again, it plays into the stereotypes and plays into perceptions of what people expect us to be like and sound like. So I think by me being here, I can help educate against that and show the
Yes,
diversity of our people.
bust the stereotypes.
That's all I do
That's my
apparently.
favorite thing. Yes, I love it when I can't think of a good example right now, but I love it when, well, I do have a good example. I love it when people make assumptions and I get the butt to break those. Even I
Yes.
can feel if they have those assumptions, like
Mhm.
the kids I work with,
Yeah.
love them, and they're amazingly honest, right?
Yes, they're
And
brutal.
they'll be like, Miss Tammy, you watch TikTok? You're old. How are you watching TikTok? I'm like, well, don't assume. So even in the smallest ways, it's great.
Yeah.
The stereotype busting, and they say it out loud so I can deal with it. It's when people don't talk about things out loud.
Mhm. Yeah. I
So
think that talking about things out loud makes an interesting conversation. And then again, you get to change perspectives and,
yes,
educate someone a different way, whether it's through, no age discrimination with TikTok, or even culturally, like the
yeah.
expectation that you have to be a certain way or you have to live a certain way. Like, it's not true. And it's cool to be able to represent something different.
If I can ask you to have a crystal ball, okay, knowing that there are limits to that, none of us know what tomorrow brings, right? Do you see yourself leaving Korea, staying in Korea? What my magic wand, what would your preference be? Do you think as of today, what is it, 4/22/22?
Mhm. Happy Earth Day, by the way.
Thank
um,
you very much. Happy Earth Day.
if I were to see into the future, it's actually so complicated. I guess
Always.
one thing that I do know for sure, crystal ball or not crystal ball, is that I don't believe I'm meant to live a life that's cookie cutter, and like a life that is just well organized. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
don't think that that's meant for me, and I'm okay with that.
Beauty
More
in the
like,
chaos.
yeah, and I'm trying to learn to accept that. I mentioned you before, like INFJ for the Myers-Briggs people, I'm very like meticulous, and like I want things to be done in a really beautiful but organized sort of way. And I'm sort of learning to accept, especially like as I get older, just the beauty and the chaos of and the beauty in the not knowing. So one thing
Yeah.
I do know for sure is that I don't see myself living in a cookie cutter way. And then I guess disclaimer, if you do want to live in a traditional way, there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has their own norm though. Um,
Sure.
but I see myself living eclectically, freely, but ultimately helping to heal people or helping people grow in their own sort of way. Which, as I mentioned to you off camera, of course, I've wanted to be a counselor for a while, maybe for expat communities or LGBTQ communities, really just helping
All
people
the
be their best.
above.
Yeah, or all the above, just helping people be their best self and help myself be my best self as well.
You'll make a beautiful one, a beautiful therapist. And you can ask anybody in my life. I'm very protective of my occupation, and I do not say that to just anyone, you
Well,
know.
thank you so much. This really, really was super reassuring. It's something that I have grown passionate about, even since being overseas, especially during the pandemic, and sort of mental torment that can put people through. But just really coming to learn
Absolutely.
about myself and think about the struggles I've had as an expat and as a minority, and just the sort of healing and peace I want to help bring to the world, and freedom. So
Yeah.
that's really reassuring.
Is there any, and you're not expected to know the answer to this yet, because a lot of times this is discovered during your counseling internship, which you haven't said this, people don't know, but you've recently applied and gotten into college to go toward your master's in counseling. Counseling?
Yes.
I love it. I love it. Is
Thank
any
you.
population that you're aware of now, which you may not be, aware of now that you probably wouldn't be as comfortable or be the best at working with? I mean, like all of my
Hmm.
interns, I tell them that to start to explore that, and none of us are supposed to be all loving and omniscient for all populations. We all have that limit for us. Do you know what
Sure.
that
Like
is?
almost like everyone has a niche, right?
Absolutely. And even past that, with my interns that I supervised, they would want to service everybody because that was the right thing, and how dare they limit. And my job was
Mm,
to help them to realize that you can service everybody, but if there's anyone that makes you a little bit more uncomfortable, and it's okay, we all have them, then, and sometimes you don't know until you're working with them, then by all means, refer them.
sure. To answer
Don't
your
try to tell
question,
them.
no, that I absolutely agree. I think that everybody has a specialty, everybody has a niche that is inherently meant for them. And it's okay to not know right away, but discovering that and being okay with that and accepting that's important. I do actually think I have an answer to that. Um,
Oh,
my I think a lot. I INFJ.
I like
So
it.
if I'm honest, I think the niches in terms of counseling that I wouldn't be so comfortable in would maybe be more like the substance abuse, or like domestic violence, that sort of thing. Only
Sure.
because I'm fortunate enough in my life to have never experienced something like that. And I think that as a counselor, not only do you have to be empathetic and understand people's feelings, but I think it does help if there's some degree of relatability there. So in my case, I really like gravitate toward minority groups, whether it's like gender or sexual minorities, or um, to go into more mental things like anxiety, depression, that kind of stuff I can work with. And then especially expat communities, and the throes of living overseas and having to cope with the homesickness and being culturally lost. That's sort of my niche, and I don't think I could truthfully serve to my fullest in like substance abuse or those sort of categories. So I do think there's people meant for that, and this feels a little bit more meant for me.
Absolutely. There's someone for everyone. That's
Excellent.
why we don't have
Absolutely.
to fill all of the folders for that,
I
you
think it's
know.
irresponsible because you can't be 100% in everything. But I think focusing on the things that you're best at can make you the best at that thing, even more so the best, I guess.
Well, and I think those that, and I really thought in the beginning, many, many years ago, that I was supposed to be there for everybody and all that. And I soon found out that even though I had the best intentions, there are some things that were just too close to home, no matter how much therapy I had done to work through
Yeah.
things. And that meant I had a blind side, and that's not fair to the client.
No, not at all.
And
And I would agree.
I would own my weakness in a second if it was going to hurt a client.
Absolutely. The last thing you want to do, and the worst thing you could do as a counselor is, I think, you know, not just, do something that harms the client inherently, but to not really give the client the attention and the treatment that they deserve. So
Correct.
I do think I do have my limits in that regard too. And one thing that I think, just me being me, I am a perfectionist. I really want to do everything to the best of my ability, but I think as a counselor, to be a perfectionist and try to be the best at everything is irresponsible and not good for one's own mental health.
Correct. Correct. And there's lots to be learned about that. And you're pretty good about your self-care. It was a
I try.
fairly foreign concept for me in the beginning too. And I certainly learned over time that burnout would be fastly coming.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I'm not perfect by any means though. The pandemic really taught me how to self-care, and I'm
oh,
still working my routine all the time.
absolutely. Absolutely. So not everyone knows what an expat is. And for those who don't know, the long word for it is expatriate. Do you want to describe what that is, Rosie?
Sure, I'll give
Those
my
that don't
very
live
best
overseas.
dictionary definition. So an expatriate is somebody who originates from one country. So in my case, I'm from the US, but they choose to live abroad and live in a country that like I would think of as considerably different from one's own. So I'm an expatriate in Korea, whereas someone else could be an expatriate. Like for you, you were in Bahrain. So I think I pronounced that wrong, but I tried my best. But choosing to
Or
live outside of
even
one's
in
own culture.
Mexico, if
Yeah,
you're not from there, you're an expatriate.
absolutely.
And
Hmm.
when I first heard the word, it sounded like this bad word.
Yeah, it sounds almost like exile or something, you know.
Yes,
Hmm.
like you've been knocked away, but now I prefer it over foreigner, even though that's not really a bad word either, but I just
Hmm.
prefer it. But
I know what you mean.
yeah,
I'd agree with you. I think that foreigner for me, I don't think it's bad inherently, but based on how I hear it in Korea and based on how it's typically used here, I do think I have a bit of a personal negative connotation with the word. But expatriate
sure.
feels like you have a little bit more choice and you're not like trying to escape something, but you're choosing to do something and be something different, you know, and experience something different. So I much prefer expatriate as well or expat.
Ah, nice. So I feel like someone who's never been here to South Korea, um, might be wondering what's it like? And I know that's such a broad question, but would you be willing to share from your perception what it is about it, the culture in general and specifically, and what you
Mm,
love about it so much?
absolutely. The first thing I would say for anybody who is curious about South Korea and what it's like, um, spoiler alert, it's nothing like you see in dramas. Like it's not all, you know, sunshiny flowers and, you know, all this stuff. And I don't say that to, you know, rag on the country because obviously I love it. I'm here. But I think the beauty of the country is in the imperfections and is in the culture and the things that you don't see that's overly glamorized on TV. Um,
Well
like some of
said.
my
I've
most
never thought of it like that.
yeah, I mean, I meet a lot of people that, you know, when I tell them I live in Korea, they're like, "Oh my God, do you see all these guys like running around in the suits and giving flowers?" It's like, no, no,
Getting
they're the
what?
same. Like, there's this term they have called flower boys, where they like are very well dressed, very tall, like coiffed hair men that just
Yes.
like are so romantic, and a lot of people idolize that and see,
Convenience, the series
yeah,
and all that.
yeah, based on media, but much like media is what led that roommate to think I should sound a certain way, Korean media isn't accurate to real life either. But you can find that's not what makes it beautiful, you know. It's in the culture, it's
Boy
in the
bands.
people. Yeah, boy bands are cool, but have you tried Korean food? Like, have you heard the language? Have you seen a performance? That's the stuff that is absolutely stunning to me and what keeps me here, you know,
Yeah, that's really
it's,
beautiful. What
especially
about
culture.
yeah, what about I noticed a difference for me, and again, I've only been here probably 9 months, a huge difference between an older male, an older female, a younger male, and a younger female. There's very different, a lot of differences. Um, like an older male is much more likely to chastise you and tell you
Hmm.
you're breaking a rule. I don't know if
Hmm.
that's the case or not, but that seems to be.
I do think that can be true. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, so what do I think is the reason for the differences?
Yeah. Like
Um,
I don't know if that's just in my head or not. I
oh
do
no, it's
notice
very
in
real.
bigger cities, they're by no means rude, but if you're gonna have someone be rude to you, it's gonna be in the bigger cities like Seoul or, Busan.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For me, I guess I can answer the question in multiple parts. I do think the way the age treatment and the thing that, um, you know, the sort of feeling you feel, it's very, very real. And it's actually like rooted in the Confucianism, like I'll start over. I think
That's a
what you
hard
said is actually
word.
true. Yeah, it's rooted in Confucianist tradition. So, if you really look at the history of Korea, like hundreds and hundreds of years ago,
Oh,
Confucianism was a prominent school of thought. You know, and in that school of thought, like you know, the older people they have the seniority, and you always look up to your elders. And that, even though it was years ago, it still plays into society today. So that's what you'll see. The older people, especially like the really, really old ones, they really hold true to that and they still live in that sort of way and they expect a certain level of treatment, a certain level of they call it like nopimar, which literally means like higher. It's like a higher spoken language, like a more formal version of Korean. Um, and I think that with the
how do you
younger
say the word
generation,
again?
it's nopimar.
No, kimbar.
Close. So with that, I think the younger generation sort of done away with it because it's exhausting, and I think it does cause some issues sometimes. So that's just my foreigner expat opinion. Um, the younger generation definitely leans a little bit more Western minded, a little bit more easygoing, and I think that's why you can see that difference a lot.
Except in big cities.
Except in big cities, which brings me to the other point. Thank you for that. I find that the way that Korea is, it actually reminds me of the US. You know how when you go up to the like northern, well, especially New York, they're a little bit more
Mhm.
independent, a little bit more like,
Chicago,
um,
yes,
yeah, like,
yes.
mhm. But then the further south you
Dallas,
go, especially Busan, I used to live in a city called Jinju. Down there's a lot more slow pace, a lot more family. Like
yes.
people will come up and take care of you and don't even know them, and it's very similar to the US. And I think that's a really cool bit of familiarity.
I like that. And in no way am I complaining about it. I just love noticing the differences. I
Of
mean,
course.
I I love anthropology. I love the study of culture and
Mhm,
humans and just watching. In fact, I've learned more about myself and about me as an American by leaving
mhm,
it and seeing how other people deal with things.
mhm. Something about stepping
It's
outside of your bubble and looking back at it. Mhm,
yes,
mhm.
yes. And right now I'm preparing to, in about 6 weeks, to go back to the US for a little bit. And I won't lie, I'm ready.
I
I'm
don't blame
ready for
you.
that, but it'll be about maybe 6 weeks or so after that I'll be ready to go again.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
Stepping back into something comfortable.
yes, it probably takes 2 or 3 weeks for me to adapt back to the pace, even
Mhm.
though they move fast here. What's it called? Body,
Bali
Betty,
Bali. Bali
body.
Bali culture.
Yes, moving fast. So do we, but there's more of an intensity about it. Am I just making that up? I didn't think
In
about it,
Korea.
but there's more intensity at home
Mhm.
in US.
Oh, it's funny because I would even say maybe it's just me being here for a while and me being from Florida in the States where everything's slow. I think it's more intense here only because again of historical reasons, like the Miracle on the Han River and after the war building themselves back up to this like incredibly wealthy country now in such a short amount of time. I think that sort of played into their belly belly culture. Whereas in the US, it's like we've been established for over 300 something years, and we are thankfully like a wealthy country, but we don't have to rush and do things so intensely.
I
But I
think
guess
it
it all
depends on
depends where
what
you
part.
are. Yeah, I was gonna say it just depends on where you are from. So
Yeah, yeah, but definitely fast paced. And I'm sure Pyeongtaek is slower, you
yes,
think, than Seoul and
yes.
Busan and the others? Yeah,
Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's 100% slower.
yeah. Um, But what about being in a relationship with obviously someone who is a wonderful human being? I haven't actually met him, but certainly you guys seem to go together very well. Have there's blessings for sure. Have there been some challenges, not necessarily bad, but challenges to being in a multicultural relationship?
It's an awesome question. And I think the answer sort of plays back to the stuff we were talking about earlier. So, it's like yes and no. The no in the sense that, like we talked about a little while ago, he is in his 20s. He's one of the younger people here, and he's also well traveled. He's lived in Canada and Japan and all these
Ah,
different areas. And I think
nice.
because of that open mindedness, us being
Very
in a
nice.
relationship is so easy and actually really, really natural. I find that conversations with him, they are a lot more like deep and like I don't know, they're really thought provoking because we're coming from different perspectives a lot of the time, but we still are like seeing
Yeah.
eye to eye somehow. The only conflict, and I don't mind talking about it because it plays back again to what we were talking about earlier, is
Mhm.
when you bring parents into it. The parental opinion, the traditional mindedness of like the 60 plus year old family members that don't understand why or how we make it work or why we would go outside of our cultures. And that's the only struggle. Otherwise, communication is amazing, and I think that's cool that it even transcends barriers of language and culture.
Yes, and from what you've said, the connection you have to his family and to his to your family is really beautiful.
Fun fact, they're
Yeah.
actually meeting each other for the first time next week. my family's flying here, and I'm petrified and sweating all
Are
the
you
time, but I'm so
really?
excited. Yeah, it's because it's again, it's like we already had this cultural fusion thing going on relationship wise, but now we're bringing in the older people, and it's like we're
Wow.
all together at once, and it's so terrifying, but also so exciting because like that's I mean, what more can I want? Like I'm in my favorite country with the people that mean the world to me, like and both sides like all together. It's a dream, but it's also super terrifying. So
It's getting well, and the union is definitely for sure real now with
mhm,
them arriving, and I think that's beautiful.
mhm.
It'll
It
be
hasn't been
interesting.
easy, difficult for sure to get to this point.
Right, right. You're so easy to get along with, and everything that I've heard about him, he seems to be the same way.
Yeah. I'm
So,
really
and
grateful for his patience and his
you're both
perseverance.
well traveled. That helps a lot.
I think so. And his English is good. My Korean's good enough that we can like banter back and forth. So if you ever hear us talk, it's really funny. We'll switch languages mid conversation. Like, I thought we were going to
Yes.
편의점. Yeah, we can't go to 편의점 to go to the Yakub. Like, it's just like that.
That's the way I learned the language. I need more people to do that. Please.
We speak Konglish, is
That
what we
it's like having
say.
your built-in subtitles, you know?
Mhm. Because like there's some things that are easier to say. Like I don't want to say pork and rice soup in the stone pot. I want to say tochikukbap. Like it's just easier. So there's some things that just it just sounds better the other way. So it's really fun.
You
Talking
guys
with
have
him
your
is always
little,
fun.
yeah, you guys have your own little secret language, so to
Mhm.
speak, and I think that's
So much
beautiful.
fun. But yeah, I'll pass
Well,
it along.
I tell you, think about whether you would want to, after the family leaves, of course, we can talk about it off camera, but about whether you'd want to kind of share what it was like with the meshing of the families and all that, and what that was like for you. I know
I would
there's
love
plenty of
to.
people.
That'll
Let's
be
do it.
exciting and definitely like I think it'll be a moment of growth for everybody. My family being immersed in this culture, them learning about our Jamaican culture. Like I'm hoping that it's a really, really nice cultural experience for everybody.
Yeah, I know that you're a little anxious about it, but it feels like it's going to be beautiful. It'll be
I really hope
beautiful.
so.
Even in the lack of beauty and the tough times, it'll be
The
beautiful
chaos.
because,
Beauty in the chaos.
yes, beauty in the chaos. Okay, so I think I've kept you long enough. There's anything you want to throw in there before we wrap up this wonderful, wonderful recording?
Sure. Um, I think one thing that I would like to wrap up with is if there's something in your life that you want to do, something you want to experience, or a life that you want to live that you're afraid to venture out and try, like whether it's, I don't know, in the States or, overseas, or if it's like being like living overseas or traveling overseas, there's nothing in life that's not worth experiencing. And if anything, it'll make your life a little more spicy and a little more fun. So I think it's important to try everything and most importantly learn something along the way and share what you learn with others. And I think that's what I take away from my life, and I hope that others can take away from mine too, and that they can do the same for others. I hope that makes sense.
Listen, it's beautiful. And you're going to be a blessing to many a client. I'm really happy that you
You're so
are
sweet. Thank
going to
you.
take that photo. I really am. It's
And if
beautiful.
anyone who sees this recording wants to connect or have any other questions for me, I am more than happy to talk to anyone about my experiences. I have an Instagram, so we can figure out how to put that somewhere down here later if you want, Tammy. But I'm always happy to connect and answer questions or just be a resource or a friend to you. So
I love that. Thank you, Rosie.
thank you, Tammy.
All right, blessings to you. Let us know how it goes with the family. I hope they get here safely.
They will. I'm confident they will. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Wait, I forgot. Do you usually do a sign off or something?
No, that's it.
Okay, I'll cut it
All right.
out.